What are we really seeing when it comes to the results of these lockdowns, and what has the data told us so far about so many of these expert predictions when it comes to COVID-19 and how we're supposed to handle it? We're joined now by Phil Kerpen. He's a syndicated columnist and also the president of American Commitment. Phil, thanks for making the time.
Great to be with you, Buck.
Let's talk about schools first. What does the data tell us about school lockdowns at this stage, or I should just say school closures? It's not even really lockdowns, closing schools and doing only virtual learning.
Probably the single biggest policy mistake of the entire year, which is saying a lot because we've had a lot of policy mistakes. It's interesting. The original CDC guidance on schools was really balanced, and I think anyone who actually read it and paid attention would not have closed schools. And yet we had sort of this panic contagion that swept the whole country, and all the schools were closed, and a lot of them never reopened or opened on very limited part-time schedules. And it's interesting. There was a study in the Journal of the American Medical Association a couple of weeks ago. They looked at just the impact of elementary school closures, and just for 2 months in the spring, and they calculated 5 million years of life lost from 2 months of elementary school closures, which is probably more years of life lost than we're going to have from the coronavirus. There's a very strong relationship between educational attainment, not just income, but life expectancy as well. The difference between a high school graduate and a high school dropout on average is about 5 years of life expectancy. The online learning is not working for a lot of people. For some kids, it's fine. Some of them are doing okay, but a lot of kids are failing, a lot more kids than ever failed with traditional school. And that has major long-term consequences, both economic and health consequences. And so we're essentially imposing enormous harms and enormous costs on children societally, even though children are at a near zero risk, certainly much lower risk with coronavirus than they are from seasonal flu, which is 5 to 10 times more deadly for children than coronavirus, and that we tolerate and that we think is a perfectly acceptable low level of risk. And so children have really been the biggest losers in our policy response to COVID.
It feels increasingly, Phil, like the elimination of any tolerable risk when it comes to COVID has been at the center of a lot of the policies that we see. And restaurants in New York City have just been closed as of this week. Contact tracing showed that they were responsible for, they believe, about 1% of the spread. So what have we learned about where is the virus spreading in New York and its environs? Because that's also a good proxy for where it would be spreading in other densely populated parts of the country.
Well, the data that New York published, and it's interesting because they published, very, very similar data back in May and then ignored it. And now they're finding the same thing again, which is almost all of the spread is inside of homes, inside of households. And, New York, of course, has a lot of high density residential, a lot of multifamily, apartment buildings. And so, it may be a little bit different there than some other places. But by and large, I think it's now pretty clear from the contact tracing we've seen all over the country that there's not a lot of spread in places like restaurants and retail and so forth. The spread tends to happen, sort of the one-to-one, person-to-person spread tends to happen inside of homes. Now, we also have this other problem of these occasional sort of super spreader events, which are hard to predict, and we still don't really know why some small percentage of people with this virus, and it's only maybe 10%, something like that, seem to be responsible for, a lot of the spread. And so, you got the average person who gets this virus infects 0 or 1 other people. But then you've got this small group that infects tons of people. And, we still don't really know what makes them different and why they tend to infect lots of people. And I wish more research were going into that, because that would be very useful to sort of identify and be able to predict what those characteristics are. But by and large, what we saw in the New York data, and it was remarkable because Governor Cuomo came out and he said, look, here's the data, 75% of transmission is in homes, 1% is in restaurants, so I'm closing restaurants. And, then he said, well, because it's something we can do. We can't close homes, we can close restaurants. But of course, just because you can do something doesn't mean that it's actually, he said, it's only a small difference, but it's something we can do. But if you look at the data, Buck, it's more likely to be a negative difference than a positive difference, because if you say, we're going to push gatherings and holiday gatherings and dinners and all this kind of stuff out of restaurants where people are being very strict with their distancing and their hygiene and all this stuff, we're going to push them out. We're going to close. Now they're going to take place in homes instead. Some of them won't take place at all, but a lot of them will take place in homes instead without any of those precautions. And so in my judgment, the restaurant closure is not only economically devastating, but it's more likely to increase transmission than to decrease it, because people are going to meet in home settings instead.
Well, this was a concern also last winter or late in the winter, when we recognized that New York City was facing this first big wave of COVID cases. They went into the 15 days to stop the spread and the stay-at-home orders. And a lot of people are saying, well, hold on a second. This virus is all over the place already. And now what you're going to be doing by shutting down the schools, shutting down anywhere places for people to go, is you might actually be forcing, and you mentioned multi-generational, multi-family homes, dense housing, which is all over New York City, where it's very difficult to really stay far away from others. It may have effectively sent everyone home to infect their family members inadvertently, but that was always a concern.
Yeah, I think that that almost certainly was a big part of what happened in New York back in the spring. Now, the good thing you've got going for you now in New York is, so many people have already had it. You have a very high level of community immunity, probably higher than anywhere else in the United States. And so, if you look at the New York State numbers, it's now mostly outside of the New York City area. It's sort of the rest of the state is kind of catching up. New York City, if you look at the hospital utilization and the emergency room data, you've actually got lower emergency room visits for respiratory illnesses and influenza-like illness now than in any of the previous 5 years this time of year. So you're actually lower than normal in New York City, I think, because you've got a lot of community immunity to COVID, and because the other factor, which is happening everywhere in the world right now, with very little attention paid to it, there's almost no flu activity this year. And we don't know if that's because the policy measures like the masks and the distancing and school closures are somehow more effective for flu than they are for COVID, or if the virus itself has somehow disrupted. We don't really know why it's the case, but it's a remarkable story, because remember, the experts said we're going to have this twindemic, flu's going to hit at the same time as COVID, all the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. Instead, we've got the mildest flu season since at least 2015, and maybe, we'll see if it doesn't take off at all, maybe the mildest flu season on record. So you've got, really underutilization of hospitals in a place like New York City that has relatively little COVID activity because we're not seeing any flu.
I pulled some numbers last week. I'm glad you brought that up, Phil. And we're speaking to Phil Kerpen, syndicated columnist, journalist. And Phil, I looked at the initial. Now I had I've had people write into me since to say we're not really testing for flu the way that we normally do. And to that I say, okay, because I am asking. Sometimes people are asking a question and they're really trying to push a conclusion. I'm actually asking the question, but I posed to the audience. I said, the initial data on the CDC website for the first week of December. And I think it was low for what they actually had for COVID. So this was initial data. So the numbers are clearly going to go up. And, maybe it went from, maybe might even go up by a factor of 10, let's say, right? I mean, it could go up substantially. But the initial data said that they had something like 2,000 plus COVID deaths in the first week of December that were officially COVID, meaning that this is they had three from the flu. Now, I could understand more COVID. But there's clearly something going on here. I mean, you mentioned some of the possibilities. There's no way that you have almost a factor of 1,000 more COVID deaths than you do flu deaths, given what we would see in a normal flu season. That's not possible.
Well, flu peaks are more often in January and February than they are in November and December. Sometimes you have, earlier flu seasons. So, a lot of people say, well, flu's not here yet. It's still coming. That might be true, but we've never seen levels this low. And if you look at the CDC flu testing data, it's down about 95%, 95 to almost 100%. Some weeks we've had like 98% reduction from the 5-year average. And it's not that we're not testing. The flu tests are actually higher than the 5-year average, and they're actually at a record high, the number of flu tests that the CDC tracks. And the CDC only tracks clinical labs and public health labs. So they don't track, like the rapid tests in a doctor's office. That's not in the stats. So they only have thousands of tests. They don't have millions of tests. But it's still, it indicates that I think one of three things is going on, Buck. Either we've got the public health measures that are being implemented for some reason are very effective at stopping flu, even though they don't seem to be effective at all for stopping
They're not effective
COVID.
at stopping COVID, right? Go ahead.
Right. So that's a little hard to believe, although a lot of people have been saying that. Or somehow the COVID virus itself disrupts the flu virus, which is possible. There's a phenomenon called viral interference. And this was actually how swine flu ended back in 2009. The rhinovirus came in and it sort of just knocked it out. People got that instead, and it sort of knocked it out. And there was some hope. There was actually an article, months ago, hoping that flu season would come in and sort of disrupt COVID. That definitely didn't happen, but maybe the opposite happened. Maybe COVID disrupted flu. And, once you get COVID, your mucus buildup blocks flu, or some mechanism causes viral interference. Or the third possibility is that we've got some sort of a data artifact where maybe, we get so many false positives for COVID that people get flu, they test false positive, it goes into the stats as a COVID case instead of a flu case. Maybe there's a timing issue where even though we have lots of flu tests, people are only taking the flu test after they get a negative COVID test back, and by then flu's not detectable anymore. Some people have suggested that. So there are three possibilities in my judgment. Either the policies are actually stopping flu somehow, there's actual viral interference, or we've got some sort of a data artifact based on the sequence and the way that we're doing the testing that's causing the flu cases to be mischaracterized as COVID. So it's got to be one of those three things. I'm not sure which it is or if it's a combination, but I wish there were a lot more curiosity about this, among the media and among the public health officials, because it's a pretty remarkable phenomenon, what we're seeing in the flu numbers.
Talk to me about this. And we're speaking to Phil Kerpen. He is the president of American Commitment, and he's a syndicated columnist. Phil, I see all these charts, and I've looked at some of the data myself, and they show mask mandates going into place on a timeline, and for a state, right, whether it's California or Hawaii or New York or wherever, mask mandate goes into effect. And then you have countless charts where you just give it time and the cases just skyrocket after the mandate goes into effect. What can we just tell from the numbers about this as a policy? Can we draw any conclusions, or can you draw any conclusions from what we're seeing?
I don't think masks have any effect. Mask mandates, we should differentiate the two. Mask mandates and masks are not necessarily synonymous, because just because a mandate's in an area doesn't mean everyone's wearing them or wearing them properly or handling them properly and so forth. The reason historically we've never recommended masks outside of medical settings is it's actually really hard to use a mask properly, to make sure you never touch the outside, to remove it and carefully and throw it out or wash it without ever touching the outside. And that's why we've never recommended them in non-medical settings, because even if they work sort of conceptually in sort of a lab test, we never had confidence that people would use them correctly in a way that actually could be beneficial. And I think that based on the data that I'm seeing, it's sort of, you could go either way on whether they work in an idealized setting. There is a lot of lab data showing that they probably would be beneficial if they were used sort of perfectly. But in practice, I don't see any evidence that they've been beneficial at all. And, there's cherry picking that goes on. And the CDC had a couple of very low quality studies looking at Arizona and Kansas, where they essentially just cherry picked their end dates and their comparators and said, look, masks are the reason we saw a decline. And, if you look at kind of what's happened seasonally, you have essentially identical patterns in places with and without mask mandates if they've got the same geography and the same sort of time of year. And so I don't think that they make a difference one way or the other. You could argue, some have suggested they may actually be harmful. The reason that the Nordic states have all avoided the mask mandates, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and so forth, is they say, look, the mask doesn't really do that much, especially the way a typical person handles it, who's not well trained, the way a surgeon would be, and so forth. But if you tell people that the mask protects you, then suddenly they're going to stand right next to each other for prolonged periods of time with masks on, and they're going to think they don't need to keep their distance, and they're not going to worry about
and I'm sure people that have
and they might go out of the house even if they're feeling sick because they have a mask on.
Right.
And so a false belief that a mask will protect you might actually put you at more risk.
This is what I've been saying. You're going to have people that say, well, maybe I got COVID, but my symptoms aren't that bad, and I'm wearing a mask, so I'm good to go. It's like, no, this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. But I could guarantee that's been happening all over the country, all over the world. Phil, look, I appreciate that you're willing to take a look at the data here on the numbers and come to conclusions that, aren't right in line with the consensus. I feel like this is the brainwashing that has gone on this issue is unlike anything else I've ever seen in my life. I just want to give you the last word.
Yeah, I mean, probably the most frightening thing of the past year, Buck, has been the extent to which people not only accepted all of these various arbitrary government decrees, but demanded them and welcomed them and cheered them on. And I think the extent to which a large portion of the public supports the heavy-handed, government policy response is probably the most frightening takeaway of this whole thing. And it means we could see this again every time there's a disease. So I am concerned about that, and I share your sentiments on that.
Phil Kerpen, president of American Commitment. Phil, really appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
All right, have a good one.
With travel being what it is, it's hit me hard that I really can't see people over this holiday that I want to. And for a lot of you, you might not even be able to spend time with certain family members, right? There's all these precautions out there, all these restrictions. But you can still reach out, tell them how much they matter to you, and just brighten up their holiday. Send them some real cheer with flowers from Bloomsy Box. Bloomsy Box flowers are amazing. I'm also sending them to my girlfriend each month with a Bloomsy Box subscription. You should try it. It's great. They're simply better blooms. And when you see someone's face when they arrive, oh my gosh, they'll love it. It's incredible. And the prices are fantastic. These are artisan designed arrangements, and they stay. The flowers last for such a long time. No hidden fees, no endless upsells. I got you a special discount too. Go to bloomsybox.com and enter Buck to get 15% off and free shipping. That's Bloomsybox, BLOOMSY, bloomsybox.com. Promo code BUCK for 15% off and free shipping.
Well, I think the party is uncertain of the course that we're going to take going forward. The principles that have long been the hallmark of my party are very much in question, which is, do we believe in balancing the budget? Do we believe in standing up to people like Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin? Are we committed to the principle that character counts? These are all things that I think we're going to have to decide over the coming years.
I can tell you this much. Mitt Romney's not going to be the leader of the Republican Party. That's for damn sure. Mitt Romney is a Democrat now. Not going to forget that one anytime soon. He should be ashamed of his vote for the president to be removed during that sham impeachment. An impeachment about a president having a phone call where he asked about what we know is an entirely legitimate issue, Biden family corruption, which is quite real. There's a federal investigation going on around it. They may not like that the Trumpster was using some bare knuckle politics here, but he was within his rights to do it. It was a fair ask. No action was taken on it anyway. And Mitt Romney voted to have the president removed from office based on that. Now, let's not ever forget this. There are a lot of these never Trumpers. There are a lot of these stealth Democrats running around who are now all of a sudden going to be talking about how much they care about protecting life and the pro-life movement. They're going to be talking about the Constitution and limited government and a strong national defense and all these things. They think that we're going to turn the clock back to, 2006 or something. And the Romneyite McCainian view of the Republican Party is going to be what we go back to. And I think that they're in for a rude awakening. It's not going to happen, and it should not happen. We now have a transformed Republican Party, and it should stay aligned with the principles of America first and just reason and rationality in our foreign policy and our domestic policy, support for rule of law, support for law enforcement. Those are things that aren't going away. We're not all going to start watching Milton Friedman lectures again and act like this is 1987. I recently got a crash course in home title theft, and you better pray this crime never happens to you because it goes after your most valuable asset, your home. Here's how it works. The bad guys, cyber thieves, they use a quitclaim deed to kick you off, put themselves on, and take out loans against your home's equity. You often won't find out about this until you receive a payment demand in the mail or perhaps even a foreclosure notice. You got to take action with the experts I trust because the usual identity theft services do not protect you. Go with Home Title Lock. All you have to do is go to HomeTitleLock.com, use the promo code RADIO. That will get you 30 free days of protection, and you can check online to see if you're a victim of this crime and don't even know it yet. HomeTitleLock.com, promo code RADIO, 30 free days of protection at the site, and you can check to see if your home's title has already been breached. Take action today. Create that virtual barrier around your home's title. Just go to HomeTitleLock.com and set up your 30 free days of protection today.
I had been saying, by my calculation, sometime by the end of March, the beginning of April, that the normal, healthy man and woman in the street who has no underlying conditions would likely get it. At the end of the day, the real bottom line is, when do you get the majority, the overwhelming majority of the population vaccinated so you can get that umbrella of herd immunity? And I believe if we're efficient about it, and we convince people to get vaccinated, we can accomplish that by the end of the second quarter of 2021, namely by the end of the late spring, early summer.
They're going to take as many months of your life from you as they can until they realize they no longer have that power. I mean, Fauci is, I think, making that quite clear. He's just effectively telling you that by June, let's say, April, May, March, June, July, January, February, March, April, May, June. So by the end of the second quarter, by this summer, you'll have most people who are going to get vaccinated. Do you think that means that all of a sudden the Fauciites and the rest of the lockdowners are going to say, you know what? Go live your life, folks. Go travel. Go be around people. Go socialize again. No. They're going to say, we can't know yet. There's virus still out there. The virus is still out there. You'll say, yeah, but there are a lot of viruses still out there. And, life is short. How much more of this are we supposed to take? And what you see is we have a population, unfortunately, in America. I think we've all gotten so used to everything on demand, delicious food, excellent medical care, super comfortable accommodations, even for people who aren't wealthy by any American standard. We've gotten used to all this, and we all just expect that we're going to live, deep into our 80s, maybe into our 90s, or even to triple digits. And our belief is that we are all guaranteed that, especially if we listen to the Faucis of the world. That's just not true. It's just not true. And a lot of people want to live their lives as though they recognize that that is not true, that there are no guarantees here. But what we've seen is the public, unfortunately, hand off to the Faucis of the world the right to determine for them what acceptable risk is here. And as long as you are not able to be the arbiter of your own personal risk or risk for your family, there will be bureaucrats making those calls for you. And that's what we see going on. So let's assume, let's play this out for a second. Fauci says that we'll have herd immunity effectively by June. Herd immunity by June. And you would think that at that point we should be having big celebrations, that everyone should be able to go out and do what they want to do. That's just not true. It's just not true. They're going to say, well, we can't take that risk. We have to wait and make sure that we have a period here of almost no COVID cases. Yeah, they'll relax on some of the lockdown policies, but they're still going to probably have prohibitions on large gatherings. You're not going to be able to have a wedding in a lot of states with 150 people in July, even if we're at herd immunity in June, because they're going to say, sorry, no risk, not allowed. They're going to just hold on. They're going to grip with their grubby little fingers. They're going to grip the bureaucrats and the apparatus and the Democrats and the Biden apparatchiks. They're going to hold on to this power with everything they've got, and the Cuomos and the Newsoms and all the rest of them, because they really want you all to submit. They want us to be begging to get some normalcy, some freedom back, so that then we forget, right? There's almost like a hostage vibe here, where when the hostage taker, finally gives you a a slice of cold pizza or something after they've held you for a few days and you're starving, you're thankful to your hostage taker. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Mr. Hostage Taker. Thank you, terrorist. You're going to finally let me have like something to eat. You're going to let me go to the bathroom now, or you're going to give me some water. It's been 2 days. Oh my gosh. This happens. This is a psychological response that you'll have to high stress situations. And I think they're counting on that. I think their belief is that whenever they begin to give us back our basic rights to live our lives, we'll be so beaten down at that point and so frustrated and so tired of all of this that just anything to make it stop will be our mentality. And that means that we won't question them. We won't bring up any of this. We'll just say, sure, anything to make it stop. And Fauci is out there telling everyone to get vaccinated. How's that going to go? Play 7.
You have said you would get vaccinated publicly, Dr. Fauci. Any update on when?
I don't. I'm going to wait to see. We're getting a shipment, maybe already have a shipment here on the NIH campus. I would, as soon as my turn comes up, which likely will be very soon, I'm going to be available to get vaccinated publicly so that people can see that I feel strongly that this is something we should do. And hopefully that will encourage many more people to get vaccinated.
They're going to say that as long as they think there's still people that have to get vaccinated, even those who have been vaccinated don't get to live their lives in greater freedom. That becomes the coercive mechanism. That then becomes, sorry, I know you did your part. You've listened to Fauci all along. You've worn the masks. You've social distanced. You lost your business. You shut down. You're going bankrupt. You did everything the Fauci told you. And you think, okay, well, I got vaccinated. Now I should be good to go. Right now I don't have to worry anymore. And Fauci's there to say, well, maybe you got vaccinated, but there are a lot of millions of other people that didn't get vaccinated. And let's all understand this. If we could just get nursing homes vaccinated across the country, by the numbers, this is not just a guess. By the numbers, the monthly death rate should drop in half by the time. So if we get by the end of December, if nursing homes are all vaccinated across the country, which would be pretty ambitious, that may not happen. But let's say by mid-January, late January, all the nursing homes have had all their residents vaccinated against this. You should see a 50% or more decline in mortality from the virus. 50% on a monthly basis. And that's based on what we've already, that's on months, and 50% of deaths up to this point have been nursing home residents. 50% of them up to this point have been nursing home residents. So there, you could even make a case that should be, once you get all the nursing homes vaccinated, it might even be a larger number than 50%. But nonetheless, when do we actually get to live our lives again? When do we get to stop wearing these dumb masks all the time? I hate them. I hate it. I think it's submission to popular panic and to the will of the mob. I have to wear a mask outside now in New York City. This is idiotic. There's no science to back that up. I'm not going to listen to these libs and they pull the science card. But there's no science that says you got to wear a mask outside. Think about it this way. People have been eating in New York City restaurants for months now, and they have this test and trace program, which is pretty much a joke, but, they do some testing and tracing. And think about it this way. They have looked at the data and told you that when people sit in an enclosed space in a restaurant with no mask, which is what happens when you're eating, that's 1% of the spread. But we are all supposed to believe, we are all supposed to think that outdoors there's a lot of spread happening? That outdoors you should be wearing a mask? Based on what? Where is the data to suggest that outdoor mask wearing is intelligent and that people should be doing this? Where is it? Oh, it's a solidarity thing. It's a political thing. Notice the moment that the science does not support one of their positions, the conversation suddenly shifts. The moment that they can't just yell science at the top of their lungs and all of us go, oh, okay, well, if it's what the science says, what do? They just shift and say, no, now it's actually about politics. Now it's about something else. Now there are other considerations that we're all supposed to have. Oh, isn't that convenient? Convenient indeed. And as for the vaccine itself, I have concerns here from what I'm reading in some of the analyses of the data. Not that the vaccine does not work. I think the vaccine seems to work quite well. But they're telling, well, here's what Fauci is saying about this. Play 6.
And we did not see any severe adverse events. There is reactogenicity, which really means the typical things that you get: sore arm, some muscle aches, maybe a little malaise, sometimes a fever. It usually doesn't last any more than 24 to 36 hours. But with regard to severe adverse events, that's the reason why when you go from tens of thousands of people to now 2.9 million doses have been shipped to about 145 locations today. So when you get that many people, you want to make sure you keep a heads up for the occurrence of any adverse events that you did not see in the trial.
He's saying that, they may learn some stuff here as people are getting this vaccination about the reactivity, I think is what he called it. There were people who got fevers, who got extreme fatigue, things like that from taking the vaccine. And, they also, in the tests that Pfizer did, they mostly, I think it was 5 to 10% of the people were over 60 in the Pfizer. So most of the people who got the vaccine in the Pfizer trial were younger, healthier people. That's also an interesting, we'll see how this plays out, because if you're 30 years old, why you're going to get this vaccine in 6 months when everyone who's at high risk already has gotten it? Think about this. Think about the way this will be rolled out. You're going to have people that are the people that are at high risk are going to get it first. And so over time, you'll have fewer and fewer people who are really incentivized because, well, if everyone in the senior homes, if I didn't have to worry about people over 50 getting COVID, really over 65 getting COVID, I wouldn't worry about this really at all. It's less dangerous to people under 50. It's less dangerous than a bad seasonal flu. That's just a fact. So if we get the people in the high risk category vaccinated, why is the expectation beyond that supposed to be that everyone? Are we gonna not achieve herd immunity, and even when 5-year-olds haven't been vaccinated? There'd be a lot of parents who are going to say, look, I'm not sticking this thing in my kid. There's no long-term trial that's been done on this. And kids are at no risk. So why should, and kids can barely, if ever, spread it to people who are older than them. So do kids have to get it too? When they talk about herd immunity, I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion. What does that even, it's a concept. What does that even mean in practice? But see, they don't want you to ask any of these questions. They don't want you to think about this. They just want you to jab the needle in your arm, shut up, wear that mask, do what you're told. America is not the give me liberty or give me death country that we thought we were. We've learned that. It's been very unfortunate. It's been very sad. Although I am pleased every time I see some business owner who tells one of these health bureaucrats to go stuff it.
First off, look, it's our responsibility. Wear your mask, social distance, wash your hands, be careful. That's what we have to do. If you've been around somebody or you tested positive, like I did, a month or so ago, you got to quarantine, which I did. So that's what you have to do. But we got to get this economy going. Look at this. But go back, Steve. These states that have the bad unemployment, that's what they're doing. They keep shutting these things down. How can people put food on the table if they don't have a job? And these guys like Cuomo, they don't care. They're doing fine. He's always done fine. It's everybody else that he's hurting the poorest families in his state. We're not going to do that in Florida.
Florida is showing that this stuff that they've made us all do, these lockdowns and these extreme responses, all this, it's unnecessary. Why have all these mandates when Florida is doing better than a place like New York is doing right now, or better than a place like California is doing overall, without all the mandates, right? Or rather, they have the mandates and Florida does not. So what advantage is there of them? The data does not support it. But then what you see, and this is what Senator Rick Scott brings up here, the people that are making these these decisions, the people that are saying these things, they are not themselves suffering. Governor Cuomo hasn't missed a paycheck. Governor Newsom hasn't missed a paycheck. These are wealthy people who continue to really, in many ways, grow wealthier as their power increases. It just means that they'll have more opportunities to cash in on their political on their political power down the line. The accumulation of this will just mean that they're bigger names now. They are known more in national level circles. So all the influence peddling, all the stuff, all the ways they'll be able to monetize this period, those continue for them. But we were never all in this together. We were never all in this together. There were some people who are actually suffering terribly economically from this. They're watching their businesses be destroyed. They're going bankrupt. They're having a horrible time of it. And there are other people who very clearly are able to just continue on as is and not suffer any particular consequences from this. Right? There's a lockdown for them just means work from home. For a lot of people, it's a dream come true. Look, I'm sitting here telling you right now, I am perfectly happy to not have to go to a formal radio studio anymore. There's no advantage for me in that, right? Now, I live in New York City, and I have to go into a TV studio every day, and I have to, interact in the outside world in New York, so I'm subjected to a lot of the COVID nonsense as well as the COVID risks. But for tons of people, I mean, if you live in a big house in the suburbs, and this has just meant you've really gotten used to ordering, your groceries from Amazon and having Uber Eats, deliver Chinese food to you. That's all this is really meant for them. And you don't get to go to big parties for a while. Oh well. So some people have had a terrible time of this and others have not. And the media is overwhelmingly representative of the people that have actually thrived financially and economically during the pandemic. I've done quite well while all of this was happening. That's the truth. The media has been part of this class that has benefited from it in many ways. So I continue to see this disconnect and this lack of appreciation in the media for the people out there who are just saying, what am I supposed to do here? Making a decision that ruins someone's business, that bankrupts their family, that should not be taken lightly, and it should not be something the government is even able to do. And they've been doing it to millions of people across the country. And the speak truth to power, we're the guardians of the republic journos out there, they haven't cared about this. They haven't been doing all they can to raise this plight to public consciousness. No, they're saying, wear your mask, shut up. It's not about getting a haircut. Remember when they used to say that? It was just because people wanted haircuts.